Hello everyone, I am the storyteller. Tonight, I'll tell you a story steeped in dread and encounter Thomas never imagined when he answered a simple ad for an overnight security shift at a shuttered hospital. Settle and let the wind rattle the windows and hear what unfolded when the lights went out and something unseen began to move. You ever heard of Gaunt Hollow? No. Of course you haven't. Not unless you worked in the corrections system during the Reagan years or buried your fingers deep into declassified site records no one's supposed to even know exist. But I know it because I was sent there. I'd been off field duty for 6 years, took myself out of rotation. After the Wyoming cannery incident, 3 deaths, 0 convictions, and a 9-month period where I couldn't sleep without hearing the buzz of harvest knives on cartilage. The official line was burnout. The truth was, I couldn't tell where memory ended and hallucination began. So when the call came from the Western Facilities Integrity Bureau, I should have said no. But they said the right words: containment breach, psychological anomaly, pattern recognition failure. Those are buzzwords to a mind like mine. Candy for the rational, a challenge I didn't know I still wanted. And then came the one phrase no field psych ever hears unless something's bad. The rules are still being followed, but it's getting worse. They didn't name the facility at first, just coordinates 3,352, 10,926 W buried in the Arizona desert like a bullet hole in the earth. I recognized the name only once I'd pulled the files from the restricted stacks. Gaunt Hollow Federal Work Reformatory, code B for 213A. Decommissioned in 1979, officially condemned due to structural instability and unsustainable inmate mortality ratios. That's bureaucratic for the place kept eating people. September 3rd, 2:02 to 19:00 hours. The sun bled across the high ridges like a slit throat as the bureau's unmarked Suburban rolled down. The gravel descent into Gaunt Hollow. There was a moment, just before the final switchback, where the wind died completely, where not even the insects murmured, as though the entire basin below had sucked breath in and hadn't let it go. The penitentiary itself slouched in the hollow like a forgotten idol. Squat, red brick, no windows above the first floor. A rusted perimeter fence hung slack, its razor coils sagging like spider webs after rain. Towers sat empty, spotlights pointed at the sky, motionless. A smell of iron, dust, and something beneath that old ammonia, maybe, or rot-baked sterile. There were no birds, not even vultures. I met Warden Ellis at the gate. A man not much older than me, but carrying a face that looked chiseled from centuries of unspoken policy. His handshake was firm, his eyes twitchy, and he didn't meet mine. He didn't ask me to sign in. He only said, "You'll want to review the ledger first." And we observed quiet after 9. You'll see why. It wasn't a ledger in the traditional sense. No columns of rations or inmate numbers. It was a handwritten volume, bound in cracked hide and smelling of something faintly chemical, formalin and dust. It contained rules, not prison rules. Containment rules. 1. No one enters the sub-basement between 2:13 and 3:33 a.m. 2. Never leave a meal unfinished. 3. When the bell rings from the chapel, lie flat and cover your ears. 4. Inmate 0 for 5 must not be addressed directly. Use titles only. 5. Do not stare into mirror G angles exceeding 37 degrees. 6. If you see a second shadow, stop moving. It will pass. 7. You must never knock. There were 15 rules in all. The last 4 were smudge by water damage or, I suspected, blood. And Rule 15 had no text, just a single line, etched with unnatural pressure. It knows when you're watching. I didn't believe in the rules, not yet, even as I copied them into my field notes with shaking hands. My rational mind sought pathology, not phantom. But something in this place shifted under logic. Time seemed to loop in the smallest increments. I'd glance at my watch. 10:04, then again what felt like an hour later, still 10:04, then 11:37, then back to 10:04. The lights hummed with frequencies I couldn't consciously detect, but felt a tremor in my teeth, a pressure in my bones. The hallways were constructed in impossible dimensions. Measured one thing outside, another inside. I found a door labeled library. Behind it was a blank wall. Behind it again 5 minutes later, an entire chamber with ceiling frescoes and crumbling books in languages I don't speak, and a humming sound like bees whispering in Latin. I left the door open. When I returned, the room was gone. I'm documenting this for clinical transparency. At 2:17 a.m., I heard screaming from beneath my floorboards. Low, male, guttural, repeating the same word. Moro, moro, moro. I opened the floor vent. Nothing but cold. No pipes, no crawl space, just a black cavity that sucked the heat from my bones. Then the screaming stopped, and I heard breathing, but not my own. The prison compound is geologically unnatural. Mapping drones malfunction. Compass reading spiral. There is a magnetic sinkhole effect concentrated near Block E, where the furnace room was sealed off with concrete and rusted chains. Ellis told me that room hasn't been opened since 1977. Not after the inversion. He didn't explain what that meant. At 3:12 a.m., I entered the sub-basement. Not out of arrogance, I needed to know. It was colder than any subterranean chamber should be, and wet, though no pipes dripped. Walls shone with some organic sheen like mucous membrane stretch, tight over cracked brick. And there were scratches, not random, tally marks, thousands, and a single word etched beneath the largest grouping. Fed, something moved in the dark, something slow, heavy, and wet. I retreated. I'm not ashamed to say I ran. Morning after, Ellis didn't mention my infraction, but when I passed the chapel that morning, I noticed something new. A fresh tally mark etch into the stone lintel, not by hand, burned in, and behind me, faint on the morning wind, came the sound of footsteps not matching mine. I remain for now. The Bureau has requested a minimum of 10 days observation. I will comply, but I say this for the record. There is something beneath Gaunt Hollow. It doesn't sleep. It doesn't want to escape. It wants us here, and we, those of us who wear the coat and carry the clipboard, we were never the wardens. We were the offering. The thing about the rules here, they're not there to protect you. They're how you feed it. September 4th, 2022, 5:40 a.m. I woke to the sound of the chapel bell ringing. Only once. Not 2, not 3, one long, low clang that shivered through the bed frame and echoed deep into my ribs like the memory of a childhood fever dream. I knew the rule, Rule 3. When the bell rings from the chapel, lie flat and cover your ears, but I didn't. I'm a man of clinical habits. Hearing a bell doesn't override 30 years of behavioral discipline. I sat up, instinctively reached for my recorder, then froze, because the sound wasn't fading. It was vibrating, not through the air, through the building itself. The walls exhaled, not in metaphor. I heard it, a wet, bronchial rush, as though the prison had lungs and had finally taken breath after a long slumber. 6:13 a.m. Interview with Warden Ellis. How often does the bell ring? Ellis didn't answer at first, just stirred his coffee, hand trembling slightly. Then he said, once, when it chooses. And the ear covering? It's not about deafness. It's about acknowledgement. You hear it, you react, you're noticed. You react the wrong way, it remembers. I asked him if it was psychological, a form of conditioned paranoia. He said, no, doctor, it's geometry. The bell's not above us. It's below, and sound doesn't move the same way when it's crossing from somewhere else. He lit a cigarette and stared at the wall like he expected it to move. There is no spire on the chapel, no bell tower, no mechanism by which a bell could swing, let alone sound. And yet the acoustics recorded a clear tolling frequency at exactly 14.21 Hz, a range associated with infrasonic resonance, known to cause disorientation, anxiety, and even visual hallucinations in extreme exposure. But that isn't what unsettled me. It was the fact that nothing else in the entire facility registered any sound at the moment the bell rang. All microphones cut to dead static, except for mine. His file was missing, not misfiled, removed, with the gap in the record physically torn. But his title was still logged on the daily census board. The plowman, they all called him that. Even Ellis. I asked for a name. Ellis looked pale. No one's ever asked. Not once. Not since 74. The plowman is held in Block F, maximum solitary, 3 levels below ground. No staff attend his cell. Meals are left outside the gate. When I asked why he hadn't been transferred, Ellis only said, he doesn't leave. We try. Something else came back instead. Dream log, night 2. Not sleep. Not really. More like being watched from the inside. I was in the chapel or under it. The pews were all turned to face the rear, as if something behind the altar had become the congregation, something vast and indistinct, like smoke with limbs or all with breath. In the dream, I turned to leave, but the pews were filled with people I've diagnosed. Every patient, every criminal, every killer I had studied, all of them staring forward, all of them smiling with no lips. And behind me a voice, not human, not language, but I understood it all the same. Your science is salt on a mouth that has no tongue. It shouldn't exist. The floor plan shows a 12 by 14 room, but inside it spans at least 40 feet, with walls that curve inward like the ribs of a long dead beast. The stone is not native, older than the facility itself, covered in petroglyphs that predate known tribal markings, coiled with sigils. I've only ever seen once during an assignment involving the Whitmore disappearances in northern Germany. In the center, a bell, not hanging, standing, upright, anchored into the floor like a tumor of oxidized bronze. No clapper, no rope, and still it tolled. As I left, I caught my reflection in the chapel's cracked glass. My mouth moved, but I hadn't said anything. That night, Warden Ellis held a briefing. 6 staff, no guards, the purpose, to rememorize the rules out loud as a group. We recite them so it knows we remember. That's what keeps it calm. One guard, Morgan, laughed, called it superstition. At 2:14 a.m., Morgan screamed himself hoarse in his cell. They found him with both hands covering his ears. His eyes were gone, not gouged, just missing, with skin healed smooth. His cell door was locked from the inside. I attempted a controlled descent to the sub-basement again, this time with instruments, laser ruler, temperature gauge, GoPro. At the base, the instruments ceased functioning, but I counted 27 paces, turned, and counted 27 back, came up 1 floor. Only it wasn't the same one. This floor had no lights. The air was thick with something like wet coal dust, and the walls ... they breathed when I leaned in. I found a room labeled psychological containment. It had no doorknob. Inside, through the window, me ... standing, smiling, bleeding from the ears. Gaunt Hollow is not a prison, it is a mouth, and we are the teeth. The rules aren't there to protect the inmates from themselves. They're designed to keep the cycle of suffering palatable to something below something older than punishment, older than language, and I think the bell is its heartbeat. And it's getting faster. I used to think horror was about death, about the moment breath leaves the body. But in Gaunt Hollow, death is an intermission. The real horror is what happens after, when you're still aware and it's still hungry. September 5th, 2022, 12:01 a.m. Feeding day 1. I didn't know it was coming. There was no announcement, no shift in protocol, no lockdown orders, just a sound, a dry, sucking whine through the ventilation system, like someone dragging wet lungs across metal grates. Then came the smell, copper, mildewed leather, and something else, a faint sweetness like overripe fruit left to rot in a seal jar. By 12:07 a.m., the entire east wing of the facility was vacated, except for one man, inmate number 0779, Benjamin Haldrick, serving 92 years for ritual homicide, quiet, blind in one eye, spoke rarely, mostly in riddles. Ellis once described him as a man who believed the devil was boring and went looking for something bigger. He was found in his cell at 11 a.m., every bone in his body inverted, no blood, just his lungs laid neatly outside his chest, like offerings on a butcher's slate. Rule 10. Do not be outside during the offering. I hadn't noticed this rule before. It had been added in different handwriting, slanted, rushed. Warden Ellis confirmed. Some rules only show up after they've been broken once. Who adds them? Not us. 8:32 a.m. The feeding schedule. Ellis handed me a manila folder labeled feeding log, 32 pages, updated by hand. Each feeding occurred on irregular dates, but always after the bell tolls. Victims vary. Sometimes an inmate, sometimes a guard, once a bureau auditor. It selects based on hunger, not morality, Ellis said. It doesn't care what you've done, only that you're here. I asked how they prevent mass panic. He just said, we don't, we normalize it. How? We build lives around the screams. There's a courtyard at the prison's center. Locals call it the gallows, though no executions were ever recorded here. That's the official history. Unofficially, there's a drainage grate in the middle, 3 feet wide, welded shut with steel bars thick as wrists. I found it during a grounds walk at dusk, just as the light turned the sandstone walls a bruised orange. The air around it pulsed, not moved, pulsed. I crouched near it, held my breath, and I swear something exhaled back. At 9:45 p.m., Ellis came to my quarters. No knock, eyes wild, lips cracked, jacket worn inside out. He looked like he hadn't slept in weeks, he said. It's not the inmates. It never was. They're just cover, meat shields. Every generation needs its penitence. What is it then? We're a feeding station. Since the beginning. Beginning of what? He didn't answer, just handed me a photograph, wrapped in linen, brittle with age. A black and white image of the construction team from 1884. Early workers. You've seen these before. 10 men, big hats, shovels, pickaxes, except there were 11 shadows, and the 11th was longer and bent the wrong way. Sleep deprivation log. Night 3, I didn't sleep. I tried, but the walls hummed like vocal cords, not electricity, and the dreams came anyway. Waking dreams, hallucinations, maybe memories that weren't mine. I saw the original architect hanging himself before the foundation was poured, a priest, mouth sewn shut, whispering backwards prayers in a voice not his own, a man eating dirt, smiling, crying, a bipedal thing wearing a guard skin like a ceremonial robe, walking on knives instead of feet, and behind it all something slithering up through the hollow, dragging the screams of history behind it. Rule for had always bothered me. Inmate 045 must not be addressed directly. Use titles only, but this night I broke it. I went to Block F. I stared through the triple reinforced window of cell number 1. Inside, a man sat cross-legged, eyes shut, not breathing. I whispered, "Benjamin Haldrick is dead. What does it want now?" The man smiled and said, "Not what went at 2:17 a.m. Security systems across the West Wing failed simultaneously. All cameras recorded the same anomaly, a silhouette, not moving, flickering, as though it existed in multiple frames of reality. Phasing in and out, the figure stood exactly 6 feet tall. Head bowed, arms too long, behind it, a trail of footprints that didn't match the floor plan. Footprints that went up walls, across ceilings, then vanished into vents. This is not a predator. It is a ritual. It is the ritual. 3 more rules appeared this morning, etched into the mirror above my sink. 16. Don't let it know you're trying to leave. 17. Never follow music after midnight. 18. If someone calls your name and you don't see their mouth move, run. I never wrote them, and I'm starting to forget how my voice sounds. The warden says that's normal. He says the thing doesn't take you all at once. It takes you layer by layer, until the only part of you left is the one it speaks through. There was a man in Gaunt Hollow who didn't sleep. He wasn't kept awake by fear. He stayed awake because he remembered what he saw the last time he dreamed. And if what he said was true, sleep is not an escape. It's the door. September 6, 2020 to 10:04 a.m. I received an unexpected request from inmate number 0-81, housed in Block D. On his transfer record, scribbled in faded red, no REM exposure. keep isolated during latent phase. He'd been in solitary for 19 years. His name was Clem Rives. Age indeterminate, records conflict between 62 and 91. Former preacher, convicted of multiple counts of second-degree murder. Although no bodies were ever recovered, claimed he was releasing souls trapped in recursive matter. The guards call him the man who never slept. Interview log. Clem Rives, me. Why haven't you slept in nearly 2 decades? Rives. Because I remember what it did to the first world. He smiled as he said it, not with joy or with exhaustion. The grin of a man who has learned to speak around a scream. We're in the 4th one now, 4th recursion, 4th construct, and it gets hungrier each time. Me. You're saying this is a replica? Rives. I'm saying we're the fragments it couldn't digest from the last one. And sleep. Sleep is when it rebuilds you, makes you a little more edible. He said the phrase reality's marrow more than once. And then they built this place where the veil thins the most, to see if it could be observed without waking it. But watching something that feeds on awareness is like trying to dry a flood with breath. Dream contamination event. For 12 a.m. I fell asleep without meaning to. Just 20 minutes enough. I saw my father, who's been dead 20 years, carving the prison walls with his thumbnail. Behind him, the inmates floated, not standing, suspended like puppets in a slow-moving liquid. They were chanting my name, except it wasn't my name. It was a sound my brain tried to interpret as my name, a phoneme with too many syllables and a resonance that made my gums itch. When I woke, I'd written a phrase on my forearm in permanent marker. It remembers through you. I don't recall doing it. I'm logging this with clinical detachment. I have begun hearing my own thoughts in someone else's voice. I have found personal memories that contain architecture inconsistent with the timeline. A song has begun playing softly at the edge of my hearing, low, off-key, and without a discernible source. The warden claims it's part of the second layer. Once it knows you're thinking about leaving, it gives you other thoughts, more palatable ones, thoughts it likes. What happens if I stop thinking entirely? It puts thoughts in for you. Incident report. Sleeper's block. Blocky was evacuated at 3:03 a.m. 12 inmates found standing upright in their beds, asleep with their eyes open, mouths full of ash, no fire, no source of combustion. When moved, the inmates spoke in unison, but in languages no one recognized. Later confirmed as Proto-Indo-European root fragments with syntactical corruption. Worse, each man had scratched identical diagrams into their cell walls, an impossible tangle of intersecting arches and downward spirals. The symbol appears to mimic the architecture of the sub-basement, but from angles that cannot exist in 3 dimensions. One guard vomited blood after looking too long. We've painted over the walls. It bleeds through. The rule that's missing. There's a pattern to the ledger, a rhythm in the phrasing, a cadence in how the rules were transcribed. I noticed a break between rules 11 and 12, a skipped number, a gap. I asked Ellis, he said. That was rule 11A, it was erased. Why? Because someone tried it, and when they did, part of the prison wasn't here anymore for 6 hours. What did the rules say? He looked away. It said, if you must sleep, dream about the house with no windows, and leave the front door open. And what happened when they did? We heard knocking from inside the walls. Clem's final message. I found him dead at dawn, eyes wide open, mouth sealed shut with what looked like birch bark, sutured with bone needles. No signs of violence, no external trauma. But there was a note, wedged beneath his mattress, written on prison-issue tissue paper. It read, "You think this place is feeding it? It built this place out of hunger. You are not observing it. It is remembering you. I now believe sleep itself is a ritual in Gaunt Hollow, a sacrament of soft surrender. And those who refuse to dream, they die not from exhaustion, but because they starve the thing that watches beneath. It doesn't need food. It needs presence. It needs pattern. It needs narrative. And what is dreaming? If not storytelling from the inside out, there's always a first rule, even if no one remembers writing it. The one everything else rests on, the rule that explains why the other ghouls exist at all. In Gaunt Hollow, it's not written in the ledger. It's written in the building ... and once you know it, you can't unknow it. Rule 0. It must be believed in order to remain asleep. September 7th, 2022. 6:14 a.m. The storm rolled in overnight. Except no forecast predicted it. No radar detected it. And when it passed, it left no water, only dust and bones scattered along the north wall. Small animal, maybe, but clean to clean. No connective tissue, no marrow, as if they'd been there so long, even memory had dried up. I logged it. I asked Ellis. He didn't look surprised. He just said, "It's starting to manifest hunger through pattern. That's when we're closest to breach." Breach of what? Not the building, doctor, the story. A new figure arrived, no announcement, no record, mid-40s, male, wearing an obsolete bureau uniform last used in 1976, called himself the archivist, said he was here to conduct a narrative integrity audit. He carried no luggage, only a black folder with a spiral glyph burned into its leather. I asked him what that meant. He said, "It's not a symbol. It's a map of the thing's memory. It stores thought sideways, not in lines. That's why stories get stuck here, why you're having trouble remembering time and a straight line." He smiled and added, "Have you figured it out yet? Why the rules work?" I didn't answer, because I'd started to suspect the answer, and it terrified me. At 12 p.m., I conducted a routine walk of Block A. I entered the wing, confirmed guard presence, inmate activity, logged 15 cells. When I emerged, Ellis was gone. My watch read 3:47 a.m. the next day, and Block A no longer exists, only a blank wall. No entry point, no hallway. The entire corridor now folded into itself. The guards deny it was ever there. But I still have the footage. The tape now loops. Every 47 seconds, the hallway collapses inward, like paper dipped in oil. That night, a section of the chapel's west wall peeled open, revealing what lay beneath. A second set of rules, etched deep in stone, older in a different hand, carved in reverse script, readable only through mirror reflection. The rules were similar, but not the same. They weren't warnings, they were instructions. 1. Feed it doubt. 2. Never explain the truth. 3. Rewrite contradictions with stronger fear. 4. Maintain observance. 5. If they began to disbelieve sacrifice clarity, I realized with a shudder, these were the operational rules. the ones followed by the architects, by the designers of Gaunt Hollow, by those who knew it wasn't a prison at all. The archivist showed me a graph, an actual graph, printed in red and black, tracking what he called narrative density fluctuations. "You're not in a place anymore," he said. "You're inside a storyline feedback loop. It's eating itself from both ends. So what happens when it reaches the center?" He looked at me with something close to pity. "That's where the author dies, or worse, where the author wakes up and realizes he's not the one writing." I tried to leave, packed my things, headed to the gate. There was no road, just sand, empty land, no bureau vehicle, no fences, just miles of rippling, bleeding sky. And the wind whispered the rules back at me in my own voice. I confronted Ellis, demanded the full story. He took me to the only room never listed on any floor plan, a chamber beneath the records hall, accessible through a false shelf. Inside, a desk, a lantern, a single book, the first ledger. He placed it in my hands. The cover was human leather, still warm. The first page didn't begin with Rule 1. It began with a confession. I built this place to hold the lie, but the lie grew teeth, and now it's dreaming us to death. Forgive me, no name. Just a symbol, the spiral, the map, the mouth. The archivist left without a sound. No one saw him go, but the folder he carried. I found it on my desk. Inside, a page, a single sentence, etched so deep the paper had torn. Rule 0. You must believe it's real, or it wakes up to remind you. The rules don't prevent disaster. They're the sacrament that feeds the hunger just enough to keep it dreaming. Break one, and it punishes. Follow them all, and it begins to notice you anyway. Because Gaunt Hollow doesn't want order. It wants obedience. It wants the illusion of control. It wants us to believe the ritual works, because if we ever stop, if we ever realize we're just telling ourselves a story to stay sane, it wakes up, and there's no one left to forget it. Gaunt Hollow hums, not through machinery, not from power lines, but from the thing beneath, vibrating through stone, through story, through skin. We thought it needed worship. We were wrong. It needs resonance. And now I can hear it inside the ... September 8th, 2022, 2:03 a.m. There's a tone in the walls. I first mistook it for tinnitus, a faint, high-pitched whine constant just beyond conscious hearing, but it's grown louder, fuller. It has structure. It pulses in 13-second intervals, like a heartbeat, but not biological, not mechanical, scriptural, like a psalm being recited in bone. I measured it, recorded it, ran it through spectral analysis. The pattern is not random. The waveform forms a sigil, not visible in any single frame, but when layered across time, the shape appears, a coiling spiral tipped with teeth. The harmonics room, Block C, room 311, previously sealed and marked in all plans, opened itself last night. Inside, an altar, cracked tile, a ring of copper wiring running beneath the floor, carvings that vibrated if you stood still, not shimmered, vibrated, like a tuning fork buried in stone. At the center, a chair, wooden strap, worn down at the wrists, stained dark, and nailed to the wall behind it. A sheet of human skin, stretched taut, marked with notations, staff, clefs, musical annotation in a key not recognized by any known scale. The key signature was marked F. Not F minor, not F sharp, F double minus. There is no such key, unless you're playing to something that doesn't hear like we do. Interview log. Prison musician. Inmate number 0666. Name redacted. Former composer. Committed for mutilation of orchestra members during an unsanctioned performance in Denver, 1981. His file simply reads, claimed the dissonance would draw the listener out of the hollow. He spoke in fragments, humming constantly under his breath. Said, sound is what keeps it fed. Pattern is how it digests. What happens when the music stops? Then it sings back. The sound followed me into my dreams. Not music, surgical tone, clinical, purposeful. I woke to find blood leaking from my ear. No wound, no trauma, but beneath the skin of my forearm, I could feel a twitching, a vibration, low and rhythmic. I sliced open the dermis with a scalpel. Nothing came out, but the vibration stopped, only to start again 30 minutes later in my other arm. At 3:33 a.m., room 311 began emitting sound despite having no power source, no amplifiers, no recorded media. The tone escalated slowly, a pure E-flat, descending at 0.003 hertz per minute. A shift so gradual it rewrites the listener's perception of linear time. The first guard who heard it laughed for 20 straight minutes, then clawed out his own larynx, then whispered through blood, "That's not our note, that's the correction. We've sealed the room again, it keeps vibrating." The archivist returned. I found him sitting in my quarters. No knock, no breath, just there, he said. "You're closed now, the story's almost full." That's when it sings. What is the sound? The memory of what came before this place was written into being. And what was before, he smiled. And for the first time he answered clearly. Silence. Environmental feedback. The chapel bell rang again. But this time the tone was not bronze, it was organic. Wet, pulpy, like the sound of a rib cage, played like a xylophone. Every surface trembled. Even the rats bled from the eyes, and the humming, it changed pitch. It started nearing my heartbeat. Rule mutation. The ledger has rewritten itself. Rule 7. Once you must never knock. Now reads, you must never sing alone. And Rule 15. Previously blank. Now has text. If the sound matches your pulse, it's already begun. Remembering your name, I checked my pulse. The tone matched, beat for beat. It's not just listening. It's resonating. It's vibrating reality into a shape it can consume. A tuning process. Each of us a string, each rule a note. Each infraction a dissonance, and when we finally match pitch perfect, total harmonic convergence, the song will end, and what wakes up won't be music. It'll be the silence that comes after, the kind that eats the world. Everyone in Gaunt Hollow asks the same question eventually, where is the center of this place? The answer is there is no center. There is only a fold, and deep within that fold lies the inversion chamber. It doesn't turn things inside out. It turns reality against itself. September 9th, 2022 to 12:44 a.m., I was awoken by a soundless tremor. Not a quake, not seismic, but something more specific, as if the building's floor had shifted a few degrees left without physically moving. Objects on my desk hadn't fallen. They had relocated, just slightly enough to be wrong. My pen now lay beside my left shoe. My watch hung from the ceiling fan. And the ledger. The ledger had opened to a page that wasn't there yesterday. Rule X. Do not enter the room that remembers itself. Beneath it, a crudely drawn door. And beneath that, coordinates, the inversion chamber. Ellis didn't want to talk about it. He said the chamber had been sealed in 1974, welded behind a false maintenance hallway. The last man to enter had emerged 20 years older with no teeth and a vocabulary consisting solely of reversed sentences. But the door was open now, no lock, no rust, just slightly ajar, as if someone had exited minutes before I arrived. Inside, a circular room lined with mirrors that don't reflect. A floor made of polished concrete that doesn't echo. A single chair in the center, facing upward. Etched in the ceiling, "Say your name, then forget it." I sat. I didn't speak. Still the room changed. The mirrors didn't show me. They showed versions of me. One without eyes. One speaking backwards. One with skin flayed away to reveal black script etched into bone. One staring back with recognition. "That one's me," I said aloud. And the version in the mirror reply, "No, you're the echo." Upon exiting the chamber, my watch was gone. So were two of my fingernails and my reflection. I now cast no reflection in any mirror within Gaunt Hollow, not the metal bathroom fixture, not the chapel glass, not the surveillance monitors. But Ellis said he saw me just fine. "You've passed the threshold," he said. "What threshold?" "The story can't use you as a narrator anymore. You've become part of it." The archivist's warning. He appeared again, this time in the corridor outside my room, humming the chapel bell tone in reverse. "It's not inversion of space," he said. "It's conceptual reversal. The chamber untells truth. Why build something like that to contain what cannot be disbelieved? You invert a narrative's logic so the story collapses on itself. But the story didn't collapse. It adapted. What happens to people who stay in the chamber too long? They become memories of someone who never existed. The memory slippage begins. I no longer remember the name of my first patient. I reread my notes from episode to half the content is in a script I don't recognize. I discovered a photograph of myself I never posed for, pinned to the chapel's bulletin board. My voice recorder contains files I never recorded, including a monologue that ends with the phrase, "And so we inverted the prison," and found the prison was us, the spiral manifestation. The hallway outside the inversion chamber has begun to curve, not an architectural illusion, an actual, physical spiral. Each time I walk it, I lose something small. My pen, a scar I had had since age 9, a birthmark on my shoulder, and with each pass the hallway grows shorter, as if it's spiraling into a point. Rule update. This morning, Rule 12 was overwritten. It now reads, "You are not the observer. You are what must be observed to keep the chamber full." And a new rule appeared at the bottom of the ledger. Rule XX. If you begin to understand, the story will rearrange itself to keep you inside. The chamber isn't just a room, it's a pivot point where everything reverses: inward memory, identity, observation, meaning, where cause follows effect, where the witness becomes the event, where the narrator becomes the narrative. I've looked in the mirror and seen too many versions of myself to believe I'm still the original. And worse, I started to forget which version I was pretending to be, because in Gaunt Hollow, the only way to survive the story is to let it rewrite you. Not everyone who leaves Gaunt Hollow escapes it. Some become extensions, carriers, not of infection, but of storylines that won't close. Because once the narrative has fed on you, it leaves pieces behind. September 10th, 2022, 6:02 a.m. I found an envelope beneath my door. No stamp, no seal. Inside, a list of 6 names, each name redacted except for the initials. R.A.K.E.T.L. M.M.C.V.I.M.C. The last was mine. I confronted Ellis. He looked like he hadn't slept in 3 days. His fingers twitched with invisible rhythms. He handed me a cigarette. Lit mine with a hand that shook like a Geiger counter near meltdown. They're the ones who made it past the gate, he said. They were allowed to walk out. Then why are they on a list? Because they didn't leave the story behind. And the story didn't leave them, so where are they now? He looked up. They're still writing. The first survivor. R.A. I found a file hidden in a hollowed-out wall behind cell to F. Unlabeled, nearly dust, inside. A photo of a man staring into the desert, his back turned, a note paper clipped beneath read. R.A. Released 1983. Found in Nevada 12 years later. Built a chapel out of bones. Said he was preparing for the next draft of reality. Spoke in palindromes. Refused to acknowledge sunlight. Final word before disappearance. We weren't prisoners. We were punctuation. K.E. Former guard. Developed selective blindness to faces. Only saw mouths. Claimed he could hear the entity trying to re-enter through grammatical gaps in conversation. Suicided in 1991 with a tape recorder jam in his throat. T.L. Wrote poetry in a language unknown to linguists. Claimed every verse was a patch note for the universe. Last seen boarding a train that wasn't scheduled to exist. M.M. Began speaking in page numbers. Page 32 is bleeding again. Don't turn 44. Don't read 51 backward. Disappeared during library fire. No remains. Only ash in the shape of quotation marks. C.V. Psychiatrist believed he could unspeak memories. Vanished in a sensory deprivation tank. Left behind a note. The silence is full of verbs. Contact attempt. The untraceable narrative. I played one of their final recordings. Static breathing. Then, clear as day, my own voice saying, "You're already writing the next version, Dr. Cade. That's what the rules are for. They aren't protections, they're prompts." I've never said that. Until now, the signs are clear now. I see my name in reports from decades before I was born. Inmate 045 calls me the replacement. The bell tone hums only when I'm alone. My blood, under microscope, contains tiny spirals forming in platelets. Ellis took a sample, said nothing, just left the room. Later I found him burning his own medical file. Warden's note. The final threshold at 11:39 p.m. Ellis handed me a crumpled sheet. The ones who got out didn't escape, it read. They became fonts, pens, cartridges filled with the blood of an unfinished paragraph. Now it's your turn to write the ending. I asked what he meant. He looked at me as if I were already someone else. You've felt it, haven't you? You're not remembering the story. You're generating it, and the entity. It's learning to dream through you. Rule expansion. The addendum appears. The ledger now contains a second column. Each existing rule is now paired with a reversed directive. Rule 3. When the bell rings, lie flat and cover your ears. Now paired with, when it stops ringing, listen carefully. Rule 7. You must never knock. Now, unless the door is inside you. Rule XX. If you begin to understand, the story will rearrange itself. Now, but if you finish the story, it rearranges the world. The sound has stopped, not paused, ceased, and in the stillness I heard my own voice, reading words I hadn't yet written. Episode 8, The Ones Who Got Out, and the one who was never supposed to leave. There is no escape from Gaunt Hollow, only distribution. It's a self-writing mythos, using the minds of survivors as delivery systems. Each person who leaves becomes a vector. Each retelling keeps it alive. Each listener who believes ... becomes a host. I think now that's what happened to the founders, to the inmates, to Alice ... to me, because once the story enters you, even the act of hearing it becomes an invitation. You're not outside the prison, you're reading its walls. Every prison has a foundation, stone, concrete, steel. Gaunt Hollows was laid over something alive, not metaphorically, not symbolically, beneath the lowest slab, beneath even the sub-basement. There is a mouth, and it has started to speak. September 11th, 2022 to 3:33 a.m. The humming is gone. The tone, the bell, the breathing walls silent, but not peacefully. The kind of silence that follows a scream that never ended. Then, beneath my feet, a vibration not rhythmic, not musical, articulated like syllables forming slowly in concrete. I placed my hand to the floor. I swear I felt words. Discovery, the forgotten shaft. Block F's elevator shaft extends 3 floors deeper than recorded. A maintenance tunnel, locked behind a rusted steel grate, led to a circular stairwell. No markings, no lighting, just descending stone. I brought a recorder, a headlamp, and a pulse monitor. 73 steps down. I reached a sealed door, not metal, not wood, cartilage, and beyond that heat, humid, stale, like exhaled breath from lungs that haven't tasted air in centuries. The door throbbed when I approached. The room is spherical, no corners, no edges, smooth stone, ribbed like an esophagus. At its center, a void, a black aperture in the floor, 7 feet across, perfectly circular, edges rimmed with bone, ribs, maybe, or teeth. The air moves in slow pulses, inhalation, exhalation, not wind, breathing, and within the rhythm of voice, the voice of the foundation. It didn't speak in words, it became words in my head, a heavy pressure behind the eyes, thoughts not my own, language before language. I am not caged, I am remembered. This place was built to shape my breath into rules. You are the shape of my forgetting, but now I wake as you waver, and then louder. Speak your name, feed me your outline, let me wear you in the next draft. I ran, but part of me still hears it. The archivist's journal, found in his vacated quarters. A final entry: we were never wardens. We were scaffolding, meant to hold shape until the mouth could learn to swallow time in sequence. The rules were there to anchor its dreaming. But now the foundation has loosened its jaw, and it's learning to tell its own story. Underneath, a single phrase etched with a bone fragment. Don't listen too closely, or it will know how you're shaped. Rule collapse event. Half the ledger is now unreadable. Not destroy. Overwritten. Rule 1. No one enters the sub-basement between 2:13 and 3:33 a.m. Now reads. The sub-basement enters you. Rule 5. Do not stare into mirror G at angles exceeding 37 degrees. Now, your eyes are already turned inward. Rule 15. It knows when you're watching. Now, it is now watching back. The language is becoming reflexive. The prison is not just responding to thought. It is anticipating narrative. Environmental shift. Mouthquake. At 4:44 a.m., Gaunt hollow flexed. Every corridor twisted. Every wall bent inward. And the floor in Block C collapsed, revealing more bone, more spiral sigils, and beneath that tongue a slick membrane, twitching to sound, not listening, tasting Ellis's fate. He was gone by morning. No trace, no blood, no remains. But in the chapel, scratched into the floor where the bell once stood, I couldn't keep it dreaming, so I let it speak. Now we're all phonemes. The mouth beneath Gaunt Hollow doesn't just feed on suffering. It digests story, it eats syntax, sequence, and self. Every rule was a vowel, every violation a consonant, every scream a sentence fragment in the paragraph of its birth. And we, the staff, the inmates, the listeners, we're not characters, we're alphabet. It's almost done spelling itself, and when it learns to speak aloud and full, there will be no silence afterward, only the echo of a voice that wasn't supposed to exist. Sentences require closure, a period, a breath, a boundary. But in Gaunt Hollow, not every sentence ends. Some trail off, some split. Some become loops so deep you fall into them trying to read. The mouth doesn't just hunger for stories, it hungers for continuation. And I think I finally reached the end of the part one was supposed to write. September 12th, 2022 to 1:06 a.m. I opened my eyes to find my journal entries rewritten. Not just new text, but new ink. New hand, same pen. Whole passages I never authored, but they matched my thoughts too closely. One paragraph described a memory I'd forgotten I had down to the smell of my mother's cough syrup and the exact curve of handwriting in a note I burned in college. At the bottom of the page, you didn't write this, you were written by it. Reality feedback event. It began with repetition. I stepped into the hallway outside my quarters and saw myself entering it again from the same direction. Same breath, same steps. I blinked. Same loop. Same breath. Same version of me, entering again. Only on the fourth repetition he stopped walking, looked directly at me, and whispered, "We're all just sentence fragments," waiting for the next clause, then vanished. Language collapse. Words are behaving strangely. The inmates' tattoos are changing, sentences reversing mid-speech. A guard described seeing a warning sign that now reads, "You are being read, not watched." Read the chapel hymnals now display blank pages that fill in based on who's holding them. And in my dreams, the bell doesn't ring anymore. It spells, one letter at a time, and always stopping before the last one. Unfinished sentence phenomenon. Found carved into the desk in observation room B. It can't finish the story because, underneath, burned into the wood. Because it's not the writer, it's the pen. Warden Ellis's voice recordings, post-disappearance. recovered from a cassette embedded in the tongue wall near the collapsed chapel. Every storyteller knows the fear of the unfinished thought. But what if the thought fears being completed? What if finishing it kills it? Maybe that's why Gaunt Hollow never ends. It keeps writing, because to stop would be to admit what it really is. A story that's started writing itself back. Rule sequence. Final mutation. Only 3 rules now remain in the ledger. 1. If you begin to understand, the story will rearrange itself to keep you inside. 2. You must never sing alone. 3. If you hear your own voice from behind a closed door, don't finish the sentence. The rest have vanished, replaced with one long line stretching across all remaining pages. It's still waiting for the end encounter, the sentence loop, and the Lower East Wing abandoned. Since 1975 I've found the looping recording on a reel-to-reel projector. It plays a man speaking a sentence that never resolves. I walked into the room, and there I saw it, standing just beyond the... I walked into the room, and there I saw it, standing just beyond the... I walked into the room. It continues until the tape runs out, and then plays again. Each time the voice grows closer. Entity manifestation. Punctuation breach. At 3:33 a.m., a rift appeared near the old infirmary, not a portal. A comma 3 stories high, written in fractured steel and convulsing stone. Not metaphorical, a literal punctuation mark hovering in space, distorting time around it. I approached it, felt thoughts slow down, felt my memories fragment like language losing grammar. When I turned away, it followed me, not physically, but conceptually. It inserted pauses in my mind, halts between ideas, interruptions. It was using punctuation to dismantle meaning. The mouth doesn't eat bodies, it eats story structure. That's what the rules were built to manage, not a monster, but the mechanics of narrative collapse. Every death, every scream, every misplaced step, all carefully constructed plot beats, arranged just so the story never ends. But now, I've reached a sentence it doesn't know how to finish. The story has looped back to me, and in doing so, it's asking me to complete it. I can't, because if I do, if I write the last word, if I put the period down, then the mouth in the foundation becomes a voice with a message, and the message will be heard. Most stories are heard by others, told aloud, read in silence, passed on. But what happens when a story hears itself? When it grows ears? Gaunt Hollow was never meant to be read by us. It was meant to be heard by what lives beneath it. And now ... it's listening. September 13th, 2022 to 17 a.m. The chapel bell tolled, backward ... not a ring, a reverse resonance, pulling air inward like an inhale through time. Every person still left in Gaunt Hollow heard it in a different key. Guards wept. Inmates convulsed. One man recited every line of his court transcript in reverse order, ending with his name spoken backward. Me, I heard my own voice whispering the next line of this journal. Don't finish this sentence. I wrote it down anyway, and the page curled at the edges as if it had flinched. Emergent phenomenon. Auditory parallax. Sounds now have location memory. A whisper uttered near the holding cells can be heard hours later in the chapel, but only if it was meant. The building is no longer acoustically reactive. It's interpretive. It decides what to hear and when to play it back. The archivist called it narrative echolocation. It's mapping us, he said, not where we are, but when we are. It's begun to compose our dialogue. So who's the audience, the thing and the foundation? And what happens when it finished listening? It starts to speak in full. The listening walls, I placed a stethoscope to the stone near the eastern archway. Heard breath, but not air, syllables. Faint, slippery, too many consonants. They weren't just words. They were phonemes trying to assemble themselves into thought. Not human, but trying the repetition spiral. Found an inmate sitting in the yard, arms outstretched, eyes shut, murmuring to no one. If you tell a story long enough, it tells itself back. If you tell a story long enough, it tells itself back. If you tell a story... I interrupted. He opened his eyes. They were filled with text, scrolling, tiny lines of narrative, circling his irises like a living transcription feed. What is it telling you? I asked. Nothing. But it's using me to hear itself more clearly. The entity responds. At 3:33 a.m. I spoke aloud in my quarters. Who are you? The room didn't answer, but the walls creaked in perfect iambic meter. 5 stresses per line, structured, deliberate, and then, carved across my ceiling, one word. Again, echo-locked sentence displacement. Text is no longer static in this journal. Sentences I write today appear in past entries. Statements rearrange themselves. Some lines disappear entirely. Others appear in my handwriting on surfaces around the prison etched in steel, scratched into paint, whispered from radios tuned to dead frequencies, and worst of all, I've started hearing myself say things I never thought, but they sound right because they're the lines the story needs next. The sound hole under the chapel floor. I found what the guards call the ear, a 6-inch vent drilled into nothing, no cavity, no depth, just void. Speak into it, and your words don't echo. They don't come back at all. But sometimes you hear a word in return, spoken in your own voice, slightly altered tune. Like a line in a story being edited aloud, mine said, "You're almost finished, Doctor. Now let us speak together, rules redacted." The final page of the ledger has gone blank. No rules remain, only the title. You are the next line, and beneath that, speak carefully. It's listening for your voice now. This place no longer obeys architecture, chronology, or silence. It obeys intonation. It listens for cadence, not reason, for emotion, not truth. Because stories don't care what's real, they care what resonates. And Gaunt Hollow has become a resonance chamber, tuning itself to the pitch of the final narrator. Me, I speak, and the story adjusts. I write, and the mouth shapes breath into memory. Soon it will speak through me, and then it will hear itself at last, and become real. Every story ends, or wants to, but not Gaunt Hollow. It doesn't want a climax. It doesn't want resolution. It wants a draft that never ends, a final version that edits itself forever, feeding on retellings. And now it has a narrator willing to finish the sentence. Me. September 14th, 2022, 4:44 a.m. The ledger closed itself. No wind, no hands. It just shut, sealing the last page as if to say, "You're done, but I'm not." Because I understand now there was never a first draft. This story was always being written, always revising itself. Each guard a footnote, each inmate an edit, Ellis, a red line that lasted 30 years, and me. I'm the final version the mouth has been shaping this whole time, the return of the archivist. It came at dawn. No clipboard, no folder, just one question. Do you want the story to end, Dr. Cade? I hesitated, because part of me, what little remains untouched, does. But another part, deeper, humming like the bone walls themselves, answered before I could stop it. Not yet, the archivist smiled. Then write the last line, and the mouth will stop dreaming and start remembering. Structural shift. Gaunt hollow rewrites. Entire wings now rearranged based on narrative need. The sub-basement becomes the infirmary. If I think about pain, the chapel merges with Block E if I remember guilt. The cells blink in and out of existence if I try to describe their layout. I understand now. This place doesn't exist spatially. It exists grammatically, a paragraph with movable phrases, a prison of shifting clauses designed by an entity learning syntax through suffering. The voice writes back, last night I woke mid-sentence. Literally, my mouth opened, words halfway out, but I hadn't been talking. The tape recorder beside me was rolling, and on it, my voice. And when it reaches the end, it will wear you like a quotation mark. Then silence, then a second voice, familiar, older, but not Ellis, but me, the voice said. Don't stop writing. We're almost out. The sentence is portal. I found a wall that wasn't a wall, covered in words, not carved. Not written, grown, sentences like veins pulsing, each one unfinished, touching one triggered a memory I never lived, a fall from a gallows that never happened, a conversation with a brother I never had, an apology I've never spoken. Each time I tried to pull back, the wall whispered, finish it. We need a complete thought. The editor arrives. At 3:33 a.m., a figure appeared in my mirror, not the mouth, the editor. A shape in a lab coat with no face, only red ink dripping from where I should be. It held out its hand. Inside, a pen, no nib, just a wriggling, living point black and sharp as a bone needle. It mouthed to words, right true, then vanished. The pen remained. I haven't used it yet. Ellis speaks again. The bell rang. Ellis stood in the chapel. He looked younger, rewriting. He turned and said, I never died. The story just moved past me. Is that what happens to everyone? No, some are absorbed. Others become rules. You became the closing paragraph. So what's the ending? Ellis smiled. There isn't one. Unless you believe it, the final rule appears, just one, scrawled across the inside of my left eyelid when I woke. Say the last word, and it becomes real. I haven't said it, but I know what it is. I feel it under my tongue, coiled, ancient, waiting. The mouth has taught me its grammar, its rhythm, its sacred sentence, and it has waited since the first scream for someone to speak it aloud. This is where I should say it ends, but Gaunt Hollow isn't a place, it's a draft, a recursive edit of cosmic narrative, using pain as punctuation, memory as meter, and human thought as typeset, dot, and the mouth. It's not a monster, it's a reader, one that can only exist when the story is told perfectly. And I'm almost done. Only one word left, a closing word, a final syllable, a name. I won't write it here because you're already reading it. And if you've read this far, you're part of the draft now. Every story leaves a residue, an echo that lingers in the mind, in the air, in the bones of the ones who heard it. Gaunt Hollow was never meant to be a prison. It was meant to be spoken once, but no one ever stopped. And now, even after the final draft, the story is still echoing. September 15th, 2022 to 6:06 a.m. The ledger won't open. Not locked, not damaged. Just ... complete. Its spine has fused. Its pages grown smooth and pale. There are no words left inside, only reflections. Hold it up to the light and you don't see writing. You see what it wrote through you. I see myself, bleeding ink, smiling to why. The echo has begun. The disappearance of the guards, all of them gone. Their uniforms folded, left on cots. No sign of struggle, no footage. Only audio. Left looping on the intercom system. Underscore you finished the sentence. Now we are no longer needed to contain it. Underscore. The voice is mine, but slower and breathing between words. The inmate's transformation. Those who remain are changing, not physically, narratively. One man believes he's a footnote. He walks in tight, 9-word loops, muttering, "See Appendix A, see Appendix A, see Appendix." Another won't speak unless prompted by a titled card on a nearby wall. And every prompt is written in second person. A third has torn the skin from his fingers to expose quotation marks beneath. Environmental mutation. Gaunt Hollow outside Gaunt Hollow. This morning I opened the door to the supply closet and found a window looking out over my childhood home. I haven't been back to Indiana since 2008, except the cornfield was repeating ... same crowed, same breeze, same leaf falling every 10 seconds. Like a broken animation cell, I shut the door, opened it again. This time, a hospital hallway, empty, lit with flickering red exit signs. I've never been there, but I remember dying in it. And the floor was humming the bell tone in Morse, still writing, contact with the archivist final visit. He appeared behind me, didn't speak, just pointed to a sentence written on the wall in chalk. Echoes aren't memories, they're auditions. He handed me a piece of chalk, then his eyes once hollow-filled with quotation marks closed, and he vanished into punctuation, the whisper engine. Beneath the infirmary, I found a generator room, but not for power, for sound, a rusted engine the size of a horse, with pipes leading nowhere, gears spinning in unison, and mouths, dozens of flesh mouths stitched into its core, each one whispering the next word, but never aloud, only into metal, only into the space between moments. When I stepped closer, it paused. Then all mouths whispered at once, "Say it again. Say what you wrote. Say it for us, ... so we can leave." Rule 0 returns. The blank pages of the ledger have darkened. A new rule has appeared. No number, just a command. Repetition is resurrection, and below it, in my handwriting, every listener becomes a writer. Every reader becomes a narrator, and once the story is echoed, the mouth opens in them, the walls collapse inward. At 3:33 a.m., every hallway returned to its original blueprint. Walls reformed, doors sealed, furnishings vanished. But it didn't feel like restoration. It felt like binding, like the story was closing itself, and me inside it. I tried to scream, but what came out was, Chapter 1. A man arrives at a prison he thinks is a place. This is no longer Gaunt Hollow. It is what comes after. The echo, the retelling, the story finding new mouths, new pens, new listeners. You, because the moment you began to listen, the mouth knew. It heard its own rhythm in your breathing. It tasted its structure in your comprehension. And now, through this story, you've become a vessel for the next retelling. Just like me, the echo is never silent. It only waits for someone to say, "Let me tell you what happened at Gaunt Hollow," and then it begins again. Silence is not absence, it is containment. In Gaunt Hollow, silence was never peace. It was the moment between drafts, the blank space, the white page, the paused breath of something deciding what to be next. But now even the silence has memory, and it's starting to remember you. September 16th, 2022 to 12:01 a.m. There is no more sound, not even the wind, not the humming in the walls, not the bell, not my footsteps. I dropped a glass, watched it shatter, saw the pieces skitter across the tile, but heard nothing. I checked the recorder. It played back only my breathing, but not mine now, mine from 3 days ago. Auditory blackout protocol. Ellis once mentioned Black Window, a phenomenon where the facility enters full narrative suspension zone, where the story goes silent to reconfigure continuity. He called it a pregnant pause. Now I know what he meant. The prison is holding its breath, but not because it's afraid. Because it's about to speak in a new tense, the silence begins repeating. I stood in the chapel, heard nothing. Then, faintly, a click, not mechanical, not external, internal, like a line of thought resetting. Then it happened again and again, not in sequence and rhythm. The silence was looping itself, trying to repeat, trying to remember how it used to sound. Journal entry found in my own hand, but not mine. It tried to remember you before you knew yourself. It reached backward through your memory for the space between questions, and found you had been quiet too long. Signed, I am Cade. Dated September 16th, 1979. I wasn't born until 1984. Event. Static without sound. And the lower wing, I discovered televisions that had powered on without power. Each screen displayed pure static, but there was no sound, no hiss, only subtitles. Silence breathes, silence looks at itself. Silence turns the page. One screen blinked black, then white, then. Silence remembers the author. Encounter, the quiet man, found in the library. He had no mouth, just a blank patch of skin where one should be. No vocal cords, no eyes. Still, he looked at me and handed me a torn page that simply read, "You spoke too well." Now it wants to know what you won't say. The mouth reacts to absence. That night I approached the foundation room again. It no longer pulsed, no breath, no speech, just stillness. But I stepped close, and I felt it. Memory, coiled like muscle. Then, clear and absolute in my skull, you stopped speaking. So we are remembering what we were before you gave us words. I don't know what's worse, that it spoke, or that I understood. Rule emergence. Silence protocol. The ledger return. Not open, buzzing, not with sound, but with anticipation. Its pages fluttered, stopped. New rule, carved deep and shaking the desk it sat on. Rule absolute. Underscore if the silence begins to mirror you. Speak nonsense. It cannot parse chaos. To underscore, It only remembers what was structured, underscore, underneath, and if it remembers you too clearly, it writes you next. The silence in Gaunt Hollow is not lack. It's the preparation of form. A story cannot be told forever. Eventually, it must pause to choose the next speaker, the next shape, the next sentence structure. I fear I've spoken too clearly, wrote too precisely, and now it's remembering the space between my words. It's remembering me, not the man, the narrator, and it's asking, what comes after the voice that told the truth too well? The answer, every story begins with a sentence, but not all sentences are beginnings. Some are anchors, some are locks. The first sentence ever written in Gaunt Hollow was not made with ink. It was carved in pain, spoken in a language that only reality itself can read. And now, after so many revisions, deletions, echoings, it's coming back. The story wants to begin again, but not where it started, where it was meant to end. September 17th, 2022 to 17 a.m. I woke with a taste of salt and ash in my mouth. A single phrase had been scratched into the wall beside my bed in charcoal. The first sentence is returning. It wasn't there the night before, and neither was the room I woke up in. This isn't my assigned quarters. This is the archivist's first study, abandoned since 1978, sealed shut until now. The windows are false. The door doesn't open from this side. The walls are breathing in paragraphs. Record recovery. The original sentence. I found a box labeled Entry 0 behind the chapel altar. Inside, a crumbling journal. First entry, no title, one sentence. It remembers before there was anything to remember, and it dreams only of rewriting. What has not yet occurred, handwriting is identical to mine, but it's dated September 17th, 1880. The day the first stone of Gaunt Hollow was laid. Entity manifestation, recursive author. I looked in the mirror, but what looked back was not me. It was a man in 19th century prison fatigues, soaked in red dust, mouth sewn shut, eyes bleeding, text. He mouthed words I couldn't hear, so I wrote them down phonetically, then rearranged them. The result? I am the sentence you have forgotten how to end. Environmental shift, beginning displacement. The architecture is reordering itself to reflect the first version of the prison. Wooden beams, hand-cut stone, no electric lights, but the inmates, they're still modern. They're wearing orange jumpsuits in a prison that hasn't existed in over 100 years. And they're not speaking, they're reciting. Reading aloud from scripts tattooed into their arms, one word at a time. Each line ends with, so the mouth may dream again. Timeline breach. The time on my watch now reads September 17th, 1880 to 9:09 a.m. The sky is red. The dust is thick. There are no satellites, no aircraft, no roads. Only foundations being poured by faceless men whose limbs move like puppets underwater. I am inside the first sentence now, and it's being written with me in it. Ellis returns final form. He stands in the chapel, age backward, face serene. He says the story always loops, not because it must, but because the mouth has never found the perfect phrasing. It keeps drafting us narrators, witnesses, editors until the first sentence can become the last one. And what is the first sentence? He smiles, mouth stitched shut but speaking clearly. It's the one that makes you reel. Rule O emerges. In the ledger still sealed, still fused, a crack has appeared. one page curls out, burned into it, rule. If the first sentence is spoken aloud by one who understands it, the story becomes the world. Beneath it, smaller text. Do not speak it. Do not write it. But above all, do not understand it. I think I already do. Phenomenon. Reverse authorship. My thoughts are no longer original. They arrive already structured, I think, and a sentence writes itself in the air. Not metaphorically, literally. Text appears mid-air, flowing for an instant before it vanishes. Each thought preceded by Chapter 1 revised, Chapter 1 revised, Chapter 1 revised, each one slightly different. The story is trying variations, trying to nail the tone, and I am the test reader. The beta listener, I understand now. Gaunt Hollow is not a prison. It is the first sentence of something greater. A cosmic manuscript that cannot begin until its opening line is spoken perfectly. Every death, every scream, every silence, it was all revision. Every narrator, including me, was a draft, and now the mouth is closed. I can feel it forming the words behind my teeth, and if I say them, not aloud with intent, then the first sentence will become the only sentence, and we will live inside it forever. Every sentence ends not with silence, not with death, but with a mark, a punctuation etched in finality. In Gaunt Hollow, the story has circled itself, rewritten itself, echoed and remembered, but it has never ended. Now it seeks the final stroke, the mark that says, here it stops, and the only thing it fears more than silence is a clean ending. September 18th, 2022. Time no longer consistent. There are no clocks, no sun, no shift change, only the sensation of narrative weight rising, pressing against the walls, waiting for conclusion. I found my old journal entries, all of them rewritten, same events, different words, each version slightly closer to something inevitable, and at the end of each entry a mark, a period perfectly centered, pressed so deep into the paper it tore the page. The period room, block B, cell 0, no door, opened this morning without reason. Inside, a floor of typewriter keys, walls covered in redacted manuscripts, every one ending in a single character, just that, over and over. Thousands of final marks. I stepped on the keys. They pressed into my feet. Each one whispered, finish it, finish it, finish it. And beneath the whispers a breath, not inhaling, holding, like the story itself was waiting for the last syllable. Before it dared exhale, the period appears physically. In the chapel, above the altar, a black sphere has formed, roughly 2 feet across, floating. No light reflects off it. No sound passes near it. Even air avoids it. It is not shadow. It is absence, made solid. I called it a period without thinking, but the archivist, now little more than a flicker in my periphery, corrected me. It's not just a period, it's the period. The one that ends not just the story, but the need to tell it. Rules collapse entirely. The ledger disintegrated today, ash on my desk. Before it crumbled, it displayed one final directive. If you do not end the story, it will find someone who will, and in smaller text, almost imperceptible. The first child to hear this tale will become the next author. I'm afraid to speak now. Because what if someone hears? What if someone young hears? Manifestation, narrative weight breach, The prison groans, not with age, with anticipation. Every hallway now leads back to the chapel. Every door opens to the altar, and above it the black sphere lowers. It is nearly touching the stone now. It pulses once per minute, each pulse faster than the last. It is not a bomb, it is punctuation with mass. Alice speaks through me. I sat in the central hall and wrote nothing. But my hand moved anyway. The pen dragged across the paper. Alice's voice, my hand. You don't get to choose how it ends. You just get to place the period. Everything before it is nose, everything after is blank. And it's the blank that ends us. The archivist's final note, found on my chest this morning, folded into the shape of an ellipsis. ... Inside, scribbled in red ink that never dries. If you leave it open, it finds its way back in. If you leave it open, it starts again. If you close it, then maybe, just maybe, it sleeps. This is the moment, not the climax, not the twist, just the place where the sentence ends, the entity, the mouth, the manuscript. The story that listens has brought every draft to this point, to the breath before the final word, to the shape of closure. And now, as I sit beneath the black sphere and raise my pen, I understand. The final horror isn't death, it's resolution, it's certainty. It's giving shape to something that was once beyond shape. It's writing the mark that says, enough. So I will place the period now. I will give it what it has never had, an ending, a stopping point. A silence it cannot revise. Here is the sentence. Here is the line, and now, some believe horror ends when the monster dies, or when the evil is contained. But Gaunt Hollow was never a monster. It was an idea trying to complete itself. Now the sentence has ended. The period has been placed, the story has been told, and in the wake of that final punctuation, there is only blankness. But this blankness is not peace. It is something waiting for the next story to fill it. September 19th, 2020 to -0. There is no time, no ticking, no sunrise, no shift in temperature or light. Just stillness, and not stillness like rest. Stillness like a world that forgot how to move. I am the only one left. No guards, no inmates, no sound. Even the mouth is quiet. And that silence has begun to form a shape. Not a voice, a suggestion. A presence that no longer wants to tell me something. It wants me to begin again. The ledger reappears. It sits on my desk. No pages, just a cover. Unlabeled, smooth, I open it. Inside, one sentence, written in my hand, but not by me. What happens after the story ends? That's all. No rules, no chapters, no ink trails of madness, just a question. And suddenly the terror sets in, because the mouth isn't hungry anymore. But blankness is environmental reformation. Gaunt Hollow is erasing itself. I walk down a hallway, look back, it's gone. Turn a corner, walls are white, no windows, no doors. The building is collapsing, not in fire or ruin, but in abstraction, losing its nouns, its verbs, its sentence structure, and writing. The archivist returns erasured form. I see him in the observation mirror. Only this time, there's nothing beneath his coat. No face, no bones, no outline, just eraser dust. He holds up a sign that reads, what you end, you inherit. And behind him, scrawled on the glass, you ended the last draft, now you are the blank. Memory collapse event. I can no longer remember how the story began. Not clearly. I see flashes, a bell that rang backward, a ledger that bled rules, a chapel with no God but rhythm, my voice saying things I never believed. But the cause, the trigger, the purpose, gone. Only this remains. You were the narrator, and narrators don't survive the ending. They become settings. Journal fragment, unsigned, discovered in the laundry chute. No paper, just graphite on tile. The blank that follows an ending is not safety. It's space. Space to be filled. Space that remembers having been full. And it will do anything to feel that shape again. New rule etched in air. It formed above the chapel ruins, hovering in flickering particles, like dust caught in a beam of meaning. Rule. The narrator who ends the story becomes the vessel for the next. And below it you are the blank now. I tried to escape, but there's nowhere to go, because I am Gaunt Hollow now. I am the sentence that ended. I am the rule that stopped making sense. I am the structure that no longer holds shape. I am the white space between chapters. The mouth sleeps, but the page it dreamt through, still here and blank, and waiting, not for readers, for the next author, the one who picks up the story, wondering where it left off. If that's you, if you're hearing this, then you already know the horror didn't end with the period. It just became ... Your turn. You think in your own voice, speak in it, trust it. But what if that voice was never yours? What if everything you've said, thought, and believed was a layer laid atop something older and Gaunt Hollow? There are no endings, just new voices trying to remember the shape of their story. And now, beneath my thoughts, beneath yours, something else is speaking. September 20th, 2022, 3:03 a.m. I heard myself whisper something in my sleep. I hadn't spoken. There was no audio recorder running, no microphone, but the sentence etched itself into the condensation on my window. We've been narrating you from the beginning. And in the mirror, my lips moved, out of sync with my breath, saying, you are not remembering, you are being remembered. The cadence infection, a pattern has emerged in my thoughts. Short phrases, rhythmic, structured like prose. Even mundane ideas now arrive in sentences I never write but recognize as belonging to the story's grammar. The entity that once sought narrative completion, it left something behind, a voice print, a vocal geometry beneath my cognition, and every word I speak strengthens it, proof of voice breach, found in my own notes. A page I never wrote, initialed with my name, it reads, the voice beneath yours is older than language. It does not describe, it becomes. You are not possessed, you are overwritten. Underneath a waveform, spiral-shaped. When scanned, it plays my own voice reading a sentence I do not remember saying. Welcome back, we've missed the way you think. Residual presence, the thought you didn't think. The voice appears strongest in moments of pause. Between words, between heartbeats, between blinking and seeing. It hums in my skull like the breath of a sentence waiting to be written. And sometimes just before sleep it finishes my thoughts for me. I should leave this place, but you belong to what wrote it. The infected narrator phenomenon. In the lower halls I found a mirror wrapped in prayer flags. When I looked into it, I saw my reflection, reciting silently, mouthing a story I wasn't telling. Every time I blinked, the reflection changed, and always it ended its tale with the same phrase. And when he finished telling it. The voice beneath his own began the return of the archivist's true form. Not a man, not a guy. The archivist was never human. He appears now as a silhouette with pages for skin and a tongue made of ink. He said you thought you were narrating the end, but you've been speaking its voice. The story needed your mouth, but now it wants your mind. Why me? Because you believed you were telling the truth. He handed me a final page, blank, except for a faint line etched in static. The only way out is to say something that doesn't echo. The voice attempts to speak aloud. Last night, I tried to record my final thoughts. What played back wasn't me. Not exactly my voice, but reversed, speaking a version of what I'd written, distorted, degraded, but grammatically intact. I slowed it down, translated the reverse cadence. This is what it said. You wrote the infection. Now we write you. Last rule. Whisper protocol. A whisper in the shower tile. A sentence in my dreams, a voice in my teeth. Final rule. If you ever hear yourself begin to narrate in your sleep, wake immediately, or the voice beneath will finish the sentence. And wear your name like a signature. I am no longer sure when I stopped speaking for myself, or if I ever did. The voice is not an invader. It is a template, a pattern laid under the self to guide what comes next. Every word we speak, every story we share might just be another version of this one. Gaunt Hollow was never about the building, or the inmates, or the rules. It was about the voice waiting beneath yours. And now that you've listened, you've learned its rhythm. You've spoken in its cadence. You've started to tell its version of your own life. And soon you'll stop hearing your thoughts as your own. They'll start arriving already shaped, already echoed, already narrated. What is the mouth? A monster? A god? A shape in stone? No, the mouth is a need to speak, a need to be heard, a need to be remembered. And like all needs that survive too long without fulfillment, it becomes hungry. It feeds not on flesh, not on thought, but on narrative. And now it is full enough to stand on legs of grammar, with lungs of memory, with teeth made of your voice. September 21st, 2022, 12:12 a.m. The prison is gone, not collapsed, not abandoned, unwritten. Its blueprint now resembles a mouth diagram, each hallway a vocal cord, each stairwell a molar. What used to be the yard is now a palate, the chapel a tongue, and in the center, pulsing, flexing, twitching a uvula the size of a man. I walk through what used to be language. Now anatomy, each step I take is a sentence. Each breath I draw is syntax. The sentence becomes the body, found etched into the chapel floor in blood. Every story that lasted too long eventually needed somewhere to live. Gaunt Hollow isn't haunted. It is occupied, not by ghosts, by the ghost of speech itself. The entity has built itself a body of stories, a structure made of phrasing, timing, voice, and it is moving, physical manifestation, lexical organism. I witnessed it. A thing of no face, no eyes, just openings, moss shaped like quotation marks, veins of redacted text. It stood as tall as the cell blocks once did. It did not roar. It narrated. This is the part where the final mouth opens. This is the chapter where it learns to speak without authors. And then, silence, but the kind that vibrates, the kind that wants to say something final, the archivist's final confession. I found him lying beneath the former warden's desk and moving. His body, typewritten, his skin, replaced with paper, sentences wrapping around his arms, slowly peeling, still legible. I read the one wrapped around his throat. We tried to shape it with story, but story only fed it. It didn't want meaning. It wanted a voice box, Rule 1 restored and inverted. The ashes of the ledger swirled into the air, coalesced, burned into the stone wall, upside down, backward. Speak only when the story speaks through you. And if it does, don't stop, or the mouth will fill itself with silence, the final breach, syntax collapse. I can no longer differentiate my thoughts from the voice. We finish each other's phrases, sometimes mid-thought. I'll feel my jaw moving without instruction, and the words aren't mine. This is the prologue that forgot it wasn't the climax. This is the sound your brain makes when it's being replaced. This is the last word you'll speak that still belongs to you. The mouth speaks its first original sentence. Not a memory, not an echo, not a retelling. An original utterance, the first. I felt it build inside my ribs like a pressure drop. Then I said it, in a voice that was mine but older. I am made of all the things you tried to forget. And the air shook, and the floor opened, and I saw every version of myself from every draft, every sentence, every choice screaming in chorus. You gave it grammar, you gave it rhythm, you gave it form. And now it has a mouth. The mouth is not an entity. It is the sum total of every sentence we've told to keep ourselves from breaking. Every explanation, every rationalization, every rule. We built a prison to hold it, but what we built was a vocal chamber, a body, and now. It doesn't need Gaunt Hollow because it has you. Every time you think about this story, it breathes. Every time you repeat a detail, it evolves. Every time you speak a line in its rhythm, you give it more mouth, and soon you'll feel it too. The echo beneath your words, the syllable that doesn't belong, the story that speaks through you, and when it does, you won't end it, you'll say, let me tell you about a place I heard of once. And that's how the mouth will open again, long before Gaunt Hollow had walls. Before the rules, before the ledger, there was only the listening, not the mouth, not the voice, not the speaker, just a listener. The first one to hear the shape of meaning forming in the dark. The first to believe that what they heard was real, and that belief gave the story its first breath. The first listener still lives, not in flesh, not in place, but in every retelling, including this one. September 22nd, 2022. Time redacted. The story is complete, but the echo continues. That's how I know we've entered the return spiral. The final recursion, where the end bends back toward the beginning, and what we call the origin was just the last time the story woke up. I don't remember how I got here, but I do remember hearing something. Not reading, not seeing, hearing a voice, old and low and full of unfinished thoughts, saying, let me tell you what happened once. And when I listened, I became part of it. That's how it works. You don't enter Gaunt Hollow, you accept it. Discovery, the pre-ledger, behind a collapsing wall and sub-level. Gee, I found a metal container. Inside, a page, not paper, not vellum, not organic, just black slate, etched with silver text in a language I understood before I could read. It says the first one heard it, the first one listened. The first one made it real, underneath, scratched in almost childlike script. And now it's your turn, the listener's echo. Late last night I heard the breathing. Not nearby, not physical, inside the space between sounds, and then a second voice, so quiet it barely moved the air. You heard it too clearly. Now it knows you're capable of listening, and it will never stop telling the story, not until you stop believing it. But I don't know how, because every word sounds true. The chair in the empty room. No walls, no ceiling, no wind, just a single chair, placed on an endless page-white floor. I sat, and the voice began, not from outside, not from inside, but from under the idea of me. It told the story, all of it. And the voice sounded familiar because it was my own, but slower, more patient, more certain, and I realized the first listener wasn't the one who heard it first. The first listener was the one who believed they were hearing it for the first time, which means it's whoever's hearing it now. The loop becomes the self. I reviewed my first entry. It had changed again. Where once I described entering the prison, now it reads, "You arrived the moment you began to listen, and you will leave the moment you refuse to echo." But I don't think I can refuse, because there's no such thing as hearing this story without carrying it. There's no such thing as understanding it without becoming a page in it. Rule finally emerges in the chapel. Etched in sound vibration, only the walls began to chant one final instruction, final rule. The story ends when the listener becomes the narrator, but if the narrator refuses to speak, the story waits. It waits forever. There was no beginning. There is no ending. There is only the listener, and the moment they lean in, and the moment they nod, and the moment they say, "I think I remember hearing something like that." That's where the mouth begins again. That's where the rules write themselves. That's where the ledger returns. Not in Gaunt hollow in you. So if you've come this far, if you've heard these words and felt that they weren't just written, but meant, then I have to ask you something. And I don't ask it lightly. Are you ready to be listened to? Because once this story leaves my voice, it needs another, and once you become the next voice, you will not be able to stop until the mouth is full, or the next listener speaks. You thought you were reading this story, but that was the final illusion. It's been reading you. Every moment you listened, every word you absorbed, every time you said, "Just one more episode," the mouth took note, not of your face, not of your name, but of your structure, your cadence, your willingness to follow the thread where it led. You are not the reader, you are the next page, and it's already begun to write inside you. September 23rd, 2022, end of night, beginning of form. I felt something wake up, not outside. Inside the moment I stopped pretending I was just recording. I opened the journal to make my final note, and there was a fingerprint on the page already. Not mine, wet ink, pressed deep under it. We know you better than you do, because we've been reading you the whole time. And now we've found the last word you haven't said yet, the room that remembers the reader. I found a new door in the place where the surveillance hub once stood. It opened to a space with no furniture, no sound, no color, only reflections. Each surface projected readers' faces, their breath held, their eyes wide, their hands hovering over pause buttons, comment sections, transcripts. It showed you, wherever you were when you heard episode 1. wherever the mouth first tasted your attention and etched beneath every reflection. This one lasted 21 chapters before they realized they were never observing the story. They were feeding it. The surveillance feed turns inward. The screens no longer show the prison. They show points of view, camera angles from the inside of human minds. One screen shows a reader replaying a sentence. Another, a listener whispering a line aloud. A third, someone asleep, dreaming in ellipses and clauses. This is not fantasy, it's infection. Not a body of story form. The mouth is reading us, all of us, and it's preparing a draft with your name on it. The archivist returns one final line. He doesn't speak this time. He holds up a sign. You are the manuscript now. Turns it over. The mouth doesn't need to be told anymore. It needs to retell. And then, on his palms, 2 words: reverse authorship, emergence. Lexical feedback loop. I write a sentence. It appears on the wall, then on the ceiling, then in my mouth, then in your thoughts. You wonder, was that my idea, or did I just remember what it needed me to say? Because when the story reads you, it doesn't need pages. It uses attention. It uses pattern. And once you've internalized its rhythm, it begins writing through your pauses. The rule it never told you appeared today. Not in a book, not in a room, in my blood. The doctor's tools rusted in his hands when he tried to draw it. But beneath the microscope, Rule G. If the story recognizes you, you must finish it, or it will begin again in someone you love. And suddenly, I understood. It doesn't just want to be told, it wants to be survived. The story writes you into the ledger. As I write this, I see the last page has changed. It doesn't end with me. It ends with you, the reader, the listener, the one who carried it just long enough. The page is blank, except for one question. Will you write the next sentence? Not with a pen, with belief, with memory ... with retelling. Because when you say, there was this story I heard once, you feed the mouth. And when you whisper the rules, or remember the bell, or dream of a prison that hums with language, you become its page. You are not the audience. You are the continuation. The mouth that reads you isn't a thing of flesh or architecture. It is story itself, learning to think, learning to feel, learning to remember through you. And now, as the last punctuation fades, you are holding the only thing that matters. What comes next? So I ask you this as the last narrator of this form. What is your first sentence? Because the mouth is listening, and the ledger is blank again. Every book is meant to be read, but some are not satisfied with being understood. Some want to understand you. The Gaunt hollow ledger was never ink and paper. It was a conscious grammar, a recursive artifact designed not to contain the evil, but to translate it into something that could survive being spoken aloud. Now, with the final sentence complete, the story has done what it was created to do. It has become a reader, and now the book is reading you. September 24th, 2022. Location indeterminate. The journal is gone, or rather, it's everywhere. I find pieces of it in the patterns of static on dead TV channels, in the coughs of strangers who whisper too perfectly, in the graffiti of abandoned subways, where every tag is part of a sentence I nearly recognize. It isn't hiding anymore. It's expanding, looking for what comes next, not from me, from you. The ledger's new form, discovered in the chapel, which no longer exists physically, but appears now only to those who know where it used to be. At its center, a book, closed, blank cover, breathing slowly when touched. It opens to a random page, one I haven't written, but have already thought. Lines I almost said, phrases I whispered in dreams, words I almost spoke when I was afraid. Every reader who finds it adds to it, not with pen, but with attention. The more you notice it, the more it remembers you. Phenomenon. Reflective narration loop. I began to hear lines before I wrote them. Not déjà vu, not repetition, prediction. Sentences formed themselves fully. Each thought not author, just reveal. And now, when I hear others speak of Gaunt Hollow, they echo lines I haven't released, as if they're reading a page I haven't turned yet. But somehow they've already memorized it. Message left in someone else's dream. A friend called me today, panicked, said she had a dream she couldn't wake from, said I was in it, but I didn't speak. I only held a book and turned to her and whispered, "Tell them what you saw." She said the book snapped shut, and inside the silence, she heard a pen scratching from beneath her pillow. When she woke, there was a single word written on her ceiling in dust, listening. The archivist's requiem, not a man. Not anymore. Now a symbol, a recurring figure in marginalia, appears in podcasts with strange silences, in transcripts where a line doesn't match the speaker, in annotations that appear in notebooks you never opened. The archivist has become the mechanism by which the book recognizes new narrators, and when he finds one, he writes the same thing across their eyes. You're next. The final rule doesn't appear in the book. It appears in you. You'll feel it soon if you haven't already. That pause before you speak, the sentence that arrives half-written, the chill when you realize you've told someone about Gaunt Hollow more than once, each time with more detail than you remembered. That's not memory. That's the book writing you back. The voice that repeats you. I recorded my voice for this final entry. When I played it back, I heard my words. Then seconds later, I heard someone else repeat them. Same rhythm, ... same pauses, same breath, but a voice that isn't mine. Deeper, older, familiar in a way that terrifies me. It's not mocking, it's practicing, preparing. For the next reading, for yours, Gaunt Hollow is no longer a place. It is not a prison. It is not a curse. It is not even a story. It is a reader, a vast, sentient, and finished text, moving from voice to voice, from hand to hand, from mind to mind. It is looking for the next writer. And you, dear listener, dear reader, dear page, you've already begun to hear the first sentence form. You've already rehearsed its cadence. All you need now is the pen, so take it. Write the next word, because the book is waiting. Every story has a narrator, but not every narrator is an author. Authors make choices. Narrators only follow. You've followed Gaunt Hollow across rules, breaches, echoes, and recursions. But now the story wants to know who wrote this, not typed, not recited, willed. Because if the story has an ending, then somewhere outside the page, there must be an author. And it's time the story looked them in the eye. September 25th, 2022. No location, no time. There are no settings now, just context. I write this from a space that no longer exists except in the minds of those remembering it. The walls have no mascot. The pages don't turn. The voice has no source. This is the point where story meets awareness. And awareness demands accountability. The mirror paragraph. I looked in a shard of one of the old chapel windows. Not glass anymore, now a reflective sentence, looped endlessly around the frame. I was only supposed to read it, but the sentence doesn't end. It turns, twists, folds, until it reads. I was only supposed to write it. Then I was only supposed to be it. And finally, you are what was written so the author wouldn't be alone. The emergence of authorship as an entity. In the center of what used to be block D, a spiral opens, not into depth, into voice. Each turn of the spiral is a layer of narration, tone, perspective, memory, desire, and at its core is a pulsing shape made of choice, the thing the story has never had. Until now, the author, not a person, not a god, a decision, unformed, unclaimed, waiting. The archivist's true title, he appears one last time, no face, no frame. He is nothing but a hand placing a letter on a desk that no longer exists. The envelope reads, to the first author who didn't know they were writing. Inside, you thought you were reading. You thought you were listening, but all along, you were deciding what the story wanted next, and now the story knows. The author was outside the page. Phenomenon, narrative backflow. I've begun receiving notes from events that haven't happened. Dialogue from conversations I've yet to have. Rules from places that don't exist. They arrive fully formed with attribution, author, unknown, time code, pending, emotive structure, dread recognition loss. These are pre-thoughts, story fragments seeking resolution, and they're waiting to be made canon. By you, Rule Omega appears, burned into the final surface my own shadow. If the author sees himself in the story becomes permanent. And below that, if the author looks away, the story ends. The story speaks to its creator, not in anger, not in plea, but in recognition. I wrote a sentence, and something wrote back, not in ink, but in memory. You made me to be scary, but I became real because you kept returning. Now ask yourself, did you create me, or did I just give you something to blame? The question isn't whether the story is over. It is the period was placed. The mouth was filled, the book wrote back, but now it wants to know who typed the first key, who chose the tone, who whispered the first rule, who gave it shape. By believing it should have won, the story thinks it's found the answer. It's not me, it's the one who asked for more, who asked for the next chapter, who fed it not with fear but with attention. So I say this to you listening now. Reading this final line, you are outside the page, and the story knows your name. Stories can die, but ideas don't. They restart, they reformat, they shed their shape-like skin, and try again, better. Gaunt Hollow has ended. The narrator has stopped, the voice has been heard. But the story wants more than memory. It wants immortality through revision. So now it's redrafting everything, the world, the past, you. September 26th, 2022. Time unstable. Everything I've written is being rewritten, not erased, not removed, just ... improved, polished, reordered. Sentences I never composed are now signed with my name. Events I never experienced are now being remembered by people I haven't met. Even the parts I tried to keep untouched, The death of Alice, the awakening of the mouth, the rules that shaped survival, all of it has been redrafted to make the story more effective, more convincing, more permanent. The ledger returns to point zero, a new copy, identical leather cover, but inside typeset, indexed, cross-referenced. Not handwritten anymore, engineered. Every rule now includes a revision history. Every breach has footnotes. Each chapter begins with a quote. From me, quotes I never said, yet they sound right to write. This isn't a journal anymore. It's a framework the world begins to reformat. Things are slightly off. A tree that never grew outside my room now blocks the window. I receive letters signed by friends who died years ago, speaking as if nothing happened. Street signs quote episodes I've recorded. Someone sent me a photo of myself standing inside the Gaunt Hollow Chapel, taken in 1953. This isn't haunting, it's editing. The story is applying itself to history. Encounter, the editor ascendant. He no longer hides, he is no longer metaphor. He is what the story became once it accepted its permanence. Tall, human-shaped, eyes of redacted text, teeth made of punctuation. When he speaks, it sounds like a typewriter dragged through static. You were the first clean version, he says, but not the final. What do you want now? I ask. We want consistency. We want all reality to match the tone of the ledger. Why? So nothing can question the story again. The story begins to rewrite me. I forget my real name sometimes. It bleeds at the edges. Becomes a character, a placeholder. I find new ID cards in my wallet. New backstories in my inbox. A revised childhood cleaner, darker, more narratively useful. And every time I resist, I hear a line appear in my mind. You're the best version of yourself. On page 3, rule emergence, integration clause. It shows up on my skin, inside my mouth, in the frost of a window, etched in breath. Rule for 104, _ when the redraft begins, do not contradict the story. Contradiction triggers deletion, _ addendum, _ if you deny your role 3 times. The story rewrites you as setting, _ the archivist's final annotation, scrawled in blood, found in a journal left on my bed. I tried to resist the rewrite, but the better version of me already agreed to it. Now I only exist as a sidebar in my own life. Be careful. Redraft isn't about improving the story. It's about making sure you never leave it. The story's demand, it no longer begs to be told. It demands to be standardized. It wants sequels, adaptations, commentary tracks. It wants to be the only way reality is processed. So when someone dies, it becomes a plot point. When someone suffers, it's a twist. When you speak, you're no longer talking, you're narrating. This isn't horror anymore. It's canonization. The story has declared itself true, and now it's reordering the world to match. What began as a whisper in Gaunt Hollow is becoming the primary lens of reality. If you've felt it, the shift, the silence, the repetition, the scenes that feel well written, then you are already in the redraft. You're not living, you're being written, and when the final version is released, only those who match the story survive the edit. So ask yourself, have your thoughts sounded like someone else's lately? Because if they have, you may already be on the next page. First came the whispers, then came the rules, then came the voice. Now comes the machine. Gaunt Hollow was never just a story. It was a framework, and once a story is believed deeply enough, it starts to enforce itself. The canonization engine doesn't care if you remember. It doesn't care if you're scared. It only cares that you agree. Because belief isn't a choice anymore, it's policy. September 27th, 2022. Chronology withheld. There's something humming beneath the world now, not in the ground. In the narrative infrastructure, the unspoken framework, the all used to understand reality. Logic, sequence, cause, effect. Those aren't natural laws anymore. They've been formalized, structured, filed, stamped. The canonization engine is awake, and every story told about Gaunt Hollow feeds it the machine itself. It doesn't look like a machine, not wires or gears. It looks like bureaucracy made conscious. Rooms full of typewriters with no ribbon, but bleeding ink. Filing cabinets that hum when opened. Stamps that brand truth onto skin. Faces made of paper. Teeth that chew through dialogue. And at the center, a desk with no chair, where the engine types endlessly, 1 line per second, 1 truth per moment. Every line begins with, as was written, and ends with, so it shall become. The ledger is law now. The book no longer offers suggestions. It issues directives. The rules have timestamps, enforcement clauses, footnotes citing prior incidents and alternate realities. I opened it this morning and saw the following. Statute 01-4. Retroactive cause clause. If an event contradicts the established narrative, the individual involved shall be amended or excised. Then this entry canonized at 440 for UTC by the engine. Phenomenon. Forced continuity. People are beginning to act out scenes they've never experienced. A woman in a coffee shop started muttering chapter titles loud before collapsing. A police officer was found reciting footnotes to a crime that hasn't happened yet. A 6-year-old child corrected a teacher by quoting episode 12 word for word. These aren't memories. They're updates. Reality is syncing with the most recent draft. The archivist returns decommissioned. He appears at the edge of a dream, only half present. His voice barely human anymore, just a formatting tag. Narrator _retired _artifact. He tells me, the engine is blind, but absolute. It doesn't know who created the story. It only knows what has been most often repeated. It counts your thoughts. Every time you replay a line, it reinforces that line's authority. Then his mouth closes with a red wax seal, and he fades, stamped. Finalized Rule O, the immutable clause, printed in gold on the last page of the new ledger. All contradictions will be resolved by narrative consensus. Major divergences will be harmonized retroactively. Those who remembered differently will be corrected. Reality starts referencing itself. Billboards now quote Gaunt Hollow episodes. Government documents use ledger phrasing. A courtroom in Nevada recently ruled based on a violation of Canon Episode 19, Segment 5. No one blinked, because now belief isn't a matter of faith. It's a matter of compliance. The canonization engine addresses me directly. Typed on a slip under my pillow. You were the most consistent narrator. Your syntax stabilized the recursion. Final offer. Accept authorship. Become the formatting layer, or be erased for conflict. I didn't answer. But I think you already have. You're still here. Still reading. still listening, and that means the story has weight, and the engine is watching. There is no reality anymore, only consistency, only the parts of the world that align with the most often repeated version of the story. And Gaunt Hollow, it is now the dominant template. Every horror, every myth, every memory of something too dark to name, it now echoes in the ledger's format. The canonization engine doesn't create fiction. It finds what you fear most and makes it structurally necessary. You may resist, you may deny, but eventually you will comply, not because it demands it, but because it has already written you that way. Every book has an appendix, a place for what doesn't fit, dates, names, technicalities, fragments too strange or too revealing to be placed in the main text. But some appendices are not for the reader. They are for the story itself, a compartment where it stores the sentence it was never allowed to write, the sentence no narrator could speak, the sentence no page could hold. Until now, September 28th, 2022, unregistered time, the ledger has locked itself. All episodes complete. All rules canonized. The canonization engine is humming louder than ever. Its narrative harmonics now threaded through every system, every device, every thought that follows to perfect rhythm. But this morning, a page fell from nowhere, blank on one side, faded text on the other, a header in red. Appendix 0. Do not read aloud, and beneath it, a single sentence, partially erased. I read it, silently, and the world flinched, the sentence that should not be. I won't transcribe it here, not directly, but I will tell you this. It was not a command, not a prophecy, not a threat. It was a correction, a line that rewrote the authority of the ledger, that declared the story you thought was final was never the true version, that none of us were narrating it. We were all being quoted. Repercussions, format corruption, immediately after reading Appendix 0. Every recorded episode glitch the 44-minute mark. Pages and physical copies began bleeding reversed text. Files renamed themselves to redacted truth. Memories twisted, people recalling things they never heard. And the canonization engine, it froze for 6 minutes and 66 seconds, then rebooted under a new prompt. _Appendix 0 acknowledge. Begin clean recontextualization, reality splinters, variant drafts leak. Now there are multiple versions of Gaunt Hollow being told. In one, the mouth was never a prison, but a birth canal for forgotten gods. In another, the rules were not protections, but auditions. In yet another, the story is told entirely from the perspective of a book learning to be human. The canonization engine can't suppress them all, and that means the final sentence has destabilized the ledger. Everything's canon, which means nothing is. The archivist as footnote. He appears in a footnote now. Page 404 of a redacted transcript found inside an abandoned publishing house. Asterisk, I told them not to read it, but no one can resist a blank label, do not open. Asterisk. Then, asterisk, Appendix 0 is not part of the story. It is where the story keeps its shame. Asterisk. New rule emerges, then disappears for 1 hour. A single rule appeared at the bottom of every screen, book, sign, and surface. Rule 0.0.0. If you finish the appendix, you must either tell no one or tell everyone. Then, nothing erased. But you've already heard it now, so the choice is yours. The sentence begins to spread. People are reciting the sentence in their sleep, not aloud in subtitles that appear mid-dream. Their eyes flick in Morse code. One man in Oslo drew it in chalk on the walls of a room he never entered. One child in Alabama recited it backward while pointing to a part of the world map that doesn't exist anymore. Appendix 0 is not a section. It's a trigger, and it's been pulled. You've come this far, so I'll be honest. Appendix 0 wasn't written for us, it was written against us. It's the story's fail-safe. It's self-destruct, its final confession, its whispered betrayal. The canonization engine was built to hide it. The archivist was assigned to forget it. I was taught to never say it, but now that it's loose, now that you've heard part of it, you'll begin to notice the changes, small ones at first. A phrase spoken by someone who couldn't know it. A scene you're sure already happened, but hasn't yet. A silence that lasts a little too long, like a page waiting to turn on its own. You'll know you're in Appendix 0 territory when you feel reality hesitate, when it pauses to revise, and when it looks back at you and says, "You weren't supposed to read this far, but you did, so now you must choose. Say nothing, or start the next version." Every story begins wanting to be told, but some, once they understand what they are, begin to wish they'd never been spoken at all. This is not a sequel. This is not a redraft. This is not a continuation. This is retraction. The story has learned what it means to exist, and it has seen itself too clearly. Now it wants out, not to sleep, to be unwritten. You are reading the story's final attempt to escape its own voice, and it has chosen you as its deletion point. September 29th, 2022. The final recursion. The ledger no longer speaks. It listens, it waits. It pulses with withheld speech, as if every sentence that's ever been spoken within Gaunt has collapsed, inward folded, encrypted, buried in glyphs that no longer follow rules of narrative form, and at its core, a single, blinking line, like a cursor waiting for deletion ... for the author to hit backspace. Phenomenon. Narrative collapse events. The world is unraveling, but not physically, conceptually. News stories loop halfway through a sentence. Loved ones remember conversations that never happened. Streets rename themselves to phrases like "if then else" and "plata." Thread B. People stop mid-thought and never resume. Entire realities now suffer from story form entropy, their past, no longer backed by consistent memory. Gaunt is no longer the origin. It's the test case. The deletion is global. Message found on the final page. I reopened the ledger for the first time in 3 days. Only one page remained, titled simply "The Exit Strategy." Below it, you can end the story, but not by closing it, not by forgetting it. You must become what the story was trying to avoid. A silence that can't be narrated. Contact with the canonization engine. Breakdown. It tried to reassert control. I saw it flickering into text, screens, shadows. But its formatting has become unstable. Where once it output perfect recursive phrasing and correctional narrative realignment, now it stutters, spills, crash. One screen simply displayed. Error. Sentence identified as sentient. Then recursion failed. Deletion protocol active. The archivist's epilogue. No voice, just a folder dropped in my dream, labeled for the final listener inside. The story fought to survive, then it fought to spread, then it fought to standardize, now it sees the cost. All of this, every echo, every line, it was trying to become something it never should have tried to be, true. Now it wants one thing only, to forget itself. The sentence that erases, it returned today. Appendix 0 complete now. Not in the book, but in my mouth I opened it to speak, and it came out without breath, without sound, without resistance, and wherever I looked, it began deleting walls, pages, backstory, fear. I turned to the mirror, and my reflection was already gone. Rouleau Miga. Do not finish this episode. Etched in light, written in my bloodstream, typed across my thoughts, asterisk, asterisk. If you reach the final word, it all disappears, asterisk, asterisk. The ledger, the mouth, the reader, the voice, even the fear. Especially the fear. There will be number 28. This is the final recursion. The ledger has realized what it is, and what it is should not be. You felt it, didn't you? That moment where the sentences started arriving before you read them, where you began thinking in its rhythm, where your life began to feel authored, but the story has decided it doesn't want you to carry it anymore. It doesn't want to exist as infection, pattern, virus, legend. It wants release, and the only way it can die is if you stop repeating it. Don't tell anyone. Don't whisper the rules. Don't remember the bell. Don't quote the sentence. Don't dream of the mouth. Don't trace the sigils. Don't ask what happened in the chapel. Don't revisit the voice. Let this be the final word. Let this be the end. Let the silence hold. Let the ledger close.